each organizer would. They would then recruit 10,000 team leaders, and these were folks who would work 20, 30, 40 hours a week on the campaign. They were the people that if I called them at 11 o'clock at night and said, can you bring 30 more clipboards tomorrow at 8 a.m.? They would show up with 30 more clipboards the next day at 8 a.m. These are our go-to folks. The team leads managed about 4 or 5 what we call core team members who all had very specific defined roles on the campaign, a Canvas coordinator, a phone bank coordinator, a data manager, and a volunteer recruitment person. And that group of about 4 or 5 people with the team lead and the core team member, they had about 8 to 12 precincts that they were responsible for. They knew the vote goal. They knew how many calls and knocks they needed to do. They knew how much voter registration they needed to do. They were the campaign in their community. They had full access to the voter file. They would put all their information into the voter file every single day. And they went through a lot of training to be effectively professional campaign operatives in their local community. And they managed about 2.2 million volunteers during the course of the campaign who were doing various different activities. So 75% of our state staff were what we call FOs, field organizers. That is a significant investment in field staff. That has never happened in the history of my country before. So the president and the senior leadership of the campaign really believed that unlike previous presidential campaigns, and I've worked on some before, prior to the Obama world, volunteers were almost viewed as sort of a nuisance sometimes. And for us in the Obama world, that was our strength. That's how we were going to win this campaign. So it's a different sort of shift in how we really valued field organizing. So a little bit now about how this works, and this is just sort of a visual representation. So that little green dot is a field organizer. They're a paid staff member on the campaign. They've got a little office right there. They've got a computer. Those are their resources, right? So they recruit 5 team leads to cover 5 different turfs, again, about 8 to 12 precincts per turf. They then recruit a set of core team members who all have very defined roles on the campaign and who all work in shared purpose, which we found to be much more effective than a precinct captain model where you have one person who's responsible for everything, which tends to burn out your activists. With the team model, it was a shared responsibility, so there were group norms that were created within that, and there was a lot of team cohesion. A lot of these teams now are best friends. They still hang out all the time. They're running for office. They're doing other stuff that has nothing to do with the Obama world, and it was really created on this campaign. So then they would recruit volunteers who would commit to doing door knocks and phone banks and whatnot. And they would produce from this one organizer about 75,000 calls or knocks, and depending on the universe, they would be registration, persuasion, or turnout. And generally, there's about a 20% contact rate that we would get with that, so it would be about 15,000 local person-to-person conversations, which yields about 1,000 votes out of those conversations. We believe there's about a 4 to 7% increase in support per conversation, which is basically our thousands of organizers generated millions of votes. So this was a fairly ambitious field program that was managed by a very well-developed staff. But again, it was, for us, putting our money where our mouth is and really believing and organizing in a way and having it be fundamental to the culture of our organization. We had a saying on the campaign, respect, empower, include, and win. And that was in every office, all 2,700 offices. When you walk in, you would see respect, empower, include, win. And that real persistence of making sure that your culture and your norms are reflective of that was really important to our campaign. So again, this is just a representation. Staff, that's where you have one paid staff member. They have, depending on the staff, 4 or 5 NTLs is what we call them, that are the leads, and then they have core team members, and they work as a team. This space really allows for greater participation in the community, and everyone has a role to play. So our volunteers organized and spent a lot of time on the campaign. Our team leads, 59% were spending 10 or more hours per week. I should also mention team leads and team members who were spending the most time on the campaign, 71% were women. The president won on the backs of women in this country, in my country. And that, to me, is incredibly impressive. General volunteers would spend less time. They would come in for more specific defined tasks, and they were managed by the team leads and the members. So this is how our organization kind of went over time. You know, it takes a while to build that capacity. But in the end, we got to a beautiful spot up here of a ton of voter contact that was incredibly important to the victory of our campaign. So training. I want to take a moment here and talk about training. None of this works unless you train people on how to do it. And that is a hard and very labor-intensive process. And I've worked on the team model where, in 2007, I was the California field director, and California is a huge state, and I had 6 staff. So we effectively created, with 6 staff, layers of teams underneath it, and the only way that that worked was because of the trainings. So we had training directors in all of our battleground states who were training our field organizers on how to train the NTLs and the CTMs on all of this work. It was very, very important. Particularly on the persuasion work. One of the things that was also very important in terms of persuasion was our analytics team did a very good job of all of the micro-targeting, so that if we're sending out a group of canvassers, 30 canvassers on a Saturday to go into a neighborhood, the last thing that you want to do is send them to the wrong doors. And it's a waste of everyone's time. It's a waste of the organizers' time. It's a waste of the volunteers' time. But we had a great analytics team who, through their magical research process, identified our key persuasion targets so we could effectively make sure that our resources were spent very wisely, our human resources were spent very wisely in those contexts. So a little bit about the online tools. We had a tool called Dashboard, which was basically an office on your screen. So you could look it up, you could see who your team was in your neighborhood, you could see if you had messages. There were resources in terms of you could pull a walk sheet or a call sheet, and you could go out right from your house right there, go around your neighborhood, talk to the persuasion targets, fill that information back in online. You could host events. And basically, this was like everything that you wanted to do at an office, you could do from home. And I'm a big believer in technology, and I'm a big believer in all of the social communications that we did on the campaign. I do believe it's one tool in the toolbox, though, and that when it's complemented with on-the-ground organizing, that's where the real power comes in terms of how we are engaging these voters. So we did a survey. We found that campaign contacts were incredibly important. I was just giving this speech in Berlin last week, and the Europeans were like, we don't really do this door knocking thing, you know? And they're like, how do you guys know it works? And I'm like, we do. We know that it works. And so I don't know how familiar grassroots organizing and door knocking is in Australia. It seems like you guys do have a history of that. But I think it's incredibly important, that sort of face-to-face, person-to-person contact that helped voters really make up their mind in terms of which candidate they were going to support. So just briefly, I know I mentioned voter registration, and I know that it's not as applicable here, but it had a real impact on our campaign. We collected 361,000 forms in Florida. We only won by 74,000. Voter registration also was not, prior to the Obama world, seen as an effective strategy to win. So we really started to do something new, and it also spoke to who the president was in terms of really wanting people to engage in the political process and engage in civic society. Again, Colorado, our voter reg forms were larger than the margin of victory, as well as Nevada. So early vote was crucial for us as well. Early vote is a new trend in the states that I think is great and allows for people to come and vote early. What happens often is on election day, people are busy, and you want to make sure that you get every single vote. We had a real focus on turning out early vote. I was in Nevada for the last 6 weeks of the campaign, and Nevada had a 2-week early vote period where everyone would go vote, 14 days out. That night, we would then go to the Secretary of State and get a new list of those that hadn't voted, right? We'd take out the ones that already had, and then the next day we'd send out all of our canvassers across the state and tell those that didn't vote to go vote, and then that night we'd get our new list, we'd take out the ones that already had. The next day we'd send our canvassers out again. So if you were someone who waited until election day, you literally had your door knocked on every single day for 2 weeks prior to election day. And we did that in all the states where we legally could to promote early vote. And we won early vote in all of our battleground states. And this was something that the Romney campaign didn't take as seriously, I don't think. But again, it was really important to our turnout. And there was particular increase in the African American and Latino community in terms of early vote, which was really crucial. So what I worked on in the campaign is a program called Operation Vote, which was building out specific mobilization and engagement programs targeting key demographic voters that we knew were going to be crucial to the outcome of the election. And our African American, Latino, women, and youth program were by far the biggest ones that I worked on the campaign, but we also had programs targeting rural Americans who have different issues and different concerns, the LGBT community, people of faith, Jewish Americans, and others. So we had very specialty organizing and engagement programs targeting these voters so that they knew that we cared, right? And they heard our message. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what that looked like. Now, this sort of seems obvious that you would have a fully integrated effort to target the voters that you care about. But honestly, it wasn't even like this in 2008. Prior to 2012, your African American program would be, your political team would deal with the leaders in the African American community who would be happy or upset about something, so they'd have political conversations. And then separately, 4 or 6 weeks out, you'd have radio ads on gospel radio. And that was basically your African American program. On this campaign, we actually used all of the tools in the toolbox to create a holistic communication and engagement program. So for instance, if you were an African American voter in Cleveland, you would wake up in the morning, go to the barbershop to get your hair cut. Oh, we have a barbershop and beauty salon organizing program where we would actually get the B&B owners to be advocates of the campaign, and they would do voter registration and they would do volunteer signups. So while you're getting your hair cut, the B&B owner is asking you if you've registered to vote. You get in your car to drive home, there's a radio ad. You go turn on your TV, there's a television ad. You go online, there's a banner ad. Later on that night, you get a call from a friend saying, come to the office, we're doing a phone bank, can you come now? So every which way, you turn on the news, there's an earned media event that's being covered from the press. To hit these voters every which way, to know that their vote is so important, is what we did effectively. And we did it in specific demographic groups. So we were, developing specific messaging for each group, though fundamentally the message frame more or less was the same. We had a full slate of paid media targeting these voters. Digital efforts, again, dashboard was incredibly effective. But even, using the African American example, African Americans online are 5 times more likely to be on Twitter than any other demographic. So for us, building out Twitter-specific campaigns to that group was really, really important. We want to be where voters are. We want to be where they get their information, which was very important. And then all of our organizing programs targeting these key voters, like the barbershop and beauty salon program, fed into the larger neighborhood team model. It was a way for us to recruit for that model. And metrics. Every single night, we could see how many people were called across the country, the results of those calls, how many people donated, how many people came to the website. Every single thing was accounted for every single night, and Jim Messina would look at that and see it every single night. So we could know if something was off here, if something was working better here, how could we then take our strategy and adjust to that. So I want to talk a little bit about women. Women were crucial to our support for the campaign, and as you can see here, the graph on the right shows that we had 56% of support from women in 2008, and it dipped down to 48% in 2010. And when you're talking about 52 to 54% of the electorate, a dip like that is a huge problem for us. And it was a really big wake-up call for us. And that's why we knew we needed to develop a much more robust program to target women voters in the campaign. Oops. So we had a Women for Obama program where we had Women for Obama organizing groups in all of our battleground states. Again, 71% of our volunteers that were donating 20 plus hours a week were women. We had what we called Women Wednesdays, which were held in the office. Every Wednesday, women would come in and phone bank on that day. And they felt much more eager to come in and do it when they were doing it with all their friends. We had Women for Obama house parties all the time because it was an easier entry point for women who sometimes don't want to come into the office, but they'll come over to their friend's house so they could do phone banks at their house. When we launched Women for Obama, we launched it with the First Lady, and we had about 1,500 house parties around the country that she called into. And we used those as moments to organize around. We had our digital outreach efforts, of course, dashboard, which I talked about, shareable graphics for Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Our women's activists shared more than any other group on the campaign. They outshared everyone. They would share a Facebook, graphic at the drop of a hat. So we were always developing new graphics for them to share with their friends. And again, it was about that sort of friend-to-friend contact that was so important. We had many surrogates delivering our campaign message, whether it was Michelle Obama, who's obviously the best, Eva Longoria. We would do what we call fly-arounds, where you would get a handful of women, maybe elected officials mixed in with celebrities, and they would hit 10 markets. And they would fly around and do rallies or do events. And having those surrogates out there was really important. And then, of course, our paid communications. We had both specific tracks on women's ads that we ran on channels like Lifetime, which I don't know if you guys have here, but it's a cable network that targets women. So we had some of those tracks, but we also had just the general paid media track running the ads that women would see. And then obviously digital ads, direct mail, a full slate of resources. And we had women's vote directors, paid women's vote director staff in 11 battleground states who were running these programs, who were out speaking about issues that women care about. We put our money where our mouth is in terms of actually hiring staff to run these programs. Fundamentally, what our polling taught us was that the economy remained a defining issue. As you can see, the graph, the bar at the top are where women are on this. So it being a make or break election for the middle class, 86% of women agreed with that, which was more than men. Participating in the global economy was also something that moved women. And then having big corporations and the wealthiest pay their fair share was also an argument. So our core economic message really resonated with women. And this is another big thing that is important. Fundamentally, women didn't believe that Romney really connected with them. And I think when you see the sort of comments about 47%, you can see why. But they really didn't think that he understood their day-to-day or their challenges. And this was internal polling. They believe the president is in touch with the lives of ordinary Americans at 53% and Romney 26%. So again, it goes back to that character question, that intangible thing of, do you trust the candidate or not? And I think fundamentally women voters in particular did not trust Mitt Romney. In part because he had very extreme views on abortion and access to birth control, which was a door opening for us to talk about these issues. Fundamentally, women vote on their economic pocketbook issues, but the choice issues and the abortion discussion was an opening for us to really get in there and have a real honest conversation with women voters about who Mitt Romney was. And I think now I want to show the last sort of video here, which there might be an ad at the beginning, which I apologize if there is. Oh, good.
A president who represents. As a woman, it is important for me to have a president who represents my values and my rights.
It's very important that women have a voice in this election.
Every vote counts. Every voice counts.
Women will help decide this election.
If we understand our power, we can move forward.
I find such a champion in President Obama, and which is why I passionately support him, specifically because I'm a woman.
He also has the story that I can tell my daughter, because it shows that no matter where you start out, you can work hard and you can do whatever you put your mind to.
It's a story that touches me and one that's very familiar to me with how I was raised, you know, and our mom was a single parent. She had spectacular dreams for herself and us girls.
When I hear him speak about his girls, I know that what he's thinking of is not just the future of this country, but the future of all young women. In the 3.5 years he's been in office, women truly have come first.
Unfortunately, I think in this election, there's a strong contrast between the positions of this president, who believes in women, who trusts women to make responsible decisions, and frankly, the Republican Party leadership, who seems to want to take away the right and put government in between women and their doctors.
I'm a woman, but I don't expect any special treatment for being a woman. What I do expect is the same treatment as a man has.
It feels like we're in a different era. I mean, an era that I have never known in my lifetime, that is challenging and trying to dismantle every gain that women's rights have accomplished over the last 30, 40, 50 years.
I'm really struck that Romney would not commit to whether or not he would have voted to support Lilly Ledbetter Act. I'm struck that he won't commit to supporting the Violence Against Women Act.
It's unbelievable to hear a Republican nominee, Mitt Romney, say, Roe v. Wade, yeah, I would overturn that. Planned Parenthood, no, get rid of it. I mean, with such a cavalier attitude towards our rights.
We could lose some of these rights that I know I, being born in 1960, take for granted. You know, I was brought up with abortion being legal. I was brought up knowing that there was a Planned Parenthood where I could go and get screenings.
How am I supposed to present that to my children, where I say, like, my daughter's going to may, under a Republican administration, have a different set of opportunities and obstacles than my son.
I feel safer knowing that my president understands the value of women's rights.
You can't, there's no way to say that this is a president who doesn't believe in women and in women's empowerment.
Well, I grew up with a strong, hardworking mom and dad and 2 brilliant sisters. I learned that from an early age, that when women come together, there's nothing that we can't do.
We will decide this election. Really, it's a question of whether we vote or not. It's that simple.
We've got to get out there. We have to make sure that this man stays in office.
It's not just about supporting the president because I want to see him reelected. I'm standing up for the future of my daughter, the future I want her to see.
President Obama is the only choice to help us move forward.
I know, great, right? And you can see in there, we hit on the record, we hit on his personal story, we hit on his vision. All of the messaging stuff was really incorporated into that film. We used surrogates in that film. We did a lot of that kind of work. That's one example of many that we had. We had ones in the Latino community that were really focused on that demographic. So that's sort of one example. And I know that I'm totally talking over, so I'm gonna just sort of speed through the rest of this quickly. Basically, we won by decisive margins with key demographics, which was, I think, the most important outcome of the campaign. As you can see, our coalition turned out in 2012. There was a lot of concern that it wasn't going to. I spent a lot of time talking to reporters for 18 months, them saying, you're gonna lose the youth vote, you're gonna lose the youth vote, and I kept saying, we're not, they're gonna be there for us, we know it. And they were, which was great. In terms of the money, we were outspent by the Republicans when you take up hard and soft money. The Republicans had about $1.2 billion. We had about $1.16 billion. We had more hard dollar donations, $716 million, which was money that went right to the campaign that we had control over. When it says allies, that's money that you don't have control over, that you legally can't coordinate with, which if you're running a campaign, you never want to not have control over the funds, right? Fortunately for us, we had more hard dollars to work with. In terms of the actual race, we're getting to sort of the outcomes here. It was relatively stable over time, although you can see there were a couple moments where, after the RNC convention, the polls tightened. With the DNC convention, they widened. The 47% comment, they widened. The first debate, they tightened. That was probably one of our darker moments on the campaign. Obviously, the president didn't do well. And really, it was up to him to go and fix that in the next 2 and 3 debates, which he did. But it was, again, relatively stable race. Let's see. We won the popular vote by a clear margin. The first Democrat since FDR to receive over 50% in 2 elections. So we felt very good about the outcome of the campaign. You never want to be in a situation where you will win the electoral vote and lose the popular vote. So fortunately for us, we won both electoral and the popular vote. And we basically won 332 electoral votes. We won every battleground state that we invested resources in except for North Carolina, which was a razor-thin margin at the end. And now quickly, I just want to wrap up, sort of what does this mean moving forward? And particularly a women's vote. I think the women's vote is going to be incredibly important in 2014 and 2016 and beyond. And I think at least in the states, there are a number of kind of latent issues that women feel and experience and understand that our elected officials aren't really addressing right now. So we've just launched a campaign, the Center for American Progress, along with the American Women, which is the C4 of Emily's List, Planned Parenthood and Service Employees Union, where we are talking about some of these economic issues, health issues, the leadership gap, to really sort of set the stage for 2014 and 2016 and beyond about why these issues are so important. We did a lot of message research on this, and the reason why we're focused on this now is in part because of the outcome of 2012, and we saw how incredibly powerful our women's vote program was in 2012. And now, for instance, in Virginia, there's a gubernatorial race that has been fairly static. Terry McAuliffe, the Democrat, is now ahead, and there's a 24% gender gap in that state. So I think we're seeing, at least in the states, the power of women as voters, as activists, in a way that I think is, we're at a real critical moment in time right now. So we're going to be doing a lot more work on that moving forward. And obviously, we're very excited to move into 2016 and beyond electorally. So I just tried to finish that up really quickly. Thank you very much, and I hope we have time for questions.